On a serene morning in Montana, a severely injured bear was discovered standing vigil over a hollow log. What lay hidden within that log shocked all who saw it, even the most experienced wildlife experts. This wasn't merely a survival story. It was an extraordinary tale of an unexpected bond between species, one that would challenge our understanding of the natural world. Why would such a fierce predator risk its life to protect creatures it would usually view as prey? How did this one act of compassion ignite a chain of events that united an entire community and redefined our relationship with wildlife? Join me as we uncover the unforgettable story of Hope, the bear who showed us that love and protection have no boundaries. Before we delve deeper into this inspiring journey, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications if you enjoy heartwarming stories that defy expectations. You won't want to miss what's coming next. As the first light of dawn bathed Montana in soft hues of amber and lavender, a sense of calm washed over the land. The morning air, fresh with the scent of pine and moss, felt like a reminder of simpler days. Sarah Mitchell, wildlife biologist and longtime forest explorer, adjusted her gloves as she navigated her Forest Service truck along a winding dirt road. The gentle hum of the engine mingled with the sounds of the awakening forest, every tree and breeze whispering stories she had once known but never fully understood. Sarah had spent over 2 decades in these woods, studying its rhythms and secrets. She believed she had seen everything the wilderness could offer, until that fateful morning. As she rounded a bend near Cedar Creek, an odd feeling crept over her. Something was different. A moment later, the radio crackled with a message that confirmed her instincts. "Mitchell, we've got another report of that injured bear near Cedar Creek. Hikers saw her again this morning, still in the same spot, barely moving." The message caught Sarah's attention. Injured bears usually retreat to the safety of hidden places to heal or to pass away in solitude, but this bear had been in the same location for days. There was something more to this situation, and Sarah knew she had to investigate. At the trailhead, she met up with Mike Torres, a park ranger and longtime friend. His weathered face reflected a mix of concern and curiosity. "Morning, Sarah," Mike greeted, tipping his hat. "Hikers are saying the bear looks pretty rough, probably hit by a car, but she's not being aggressive, just sitting there even when people walk by." Sarah frowned. "That's odd. Injured bears usually avoid people." "Exactly," Mike agreed. "So why is she still here? What's keeping her?" Together, they set out along the trail, their boots crunching softly on the earth. The forest around them was alive with the sounds of wildlife, a bird calling, a squirrel darting past, the rustling of leaves. The towering Douglas firs watched over them, ancient and steadfast as they made their way deeper into the woods. Mike raised his hand, signaling Sarah to stop. He pointed through the trees. "There," he whispered. Through her binoculars, Sarah saw it. A large black bear, her fur matted and her body hunched in pain. But what stood out wasn't just the bear's injuries, it was her posture. Instead of resting or seeking food, the bear was alert, her body positioned to protect something behind her, a large hollow log. "She's guarding something," Sarah whispered, her voice low with awe. "Maybe cubs?" Mike suggested. Sarah shook her head. "It's too early for cubs. They're still in their dens." They watched for nearly an hour, documenting the bear's every movement. Despite her obvious distress, the bear refused to leave her post. She shifted her weight occasionally, but always positioned herself between the log and anything that approached. "We need to move in," Sarah said finally. "Whatever she's guarding, it's clearly important to her. But we have to help her too. She's not going to make it much longer in this condition." Mike nodded, adjusting the tranquilizer gun slung over his shoulder. "Let's do it." With careful steps, they approached. The bear watched them intently, but made no attempt to flee. Her eyes, filled with pain, met Sarah's for a brief moment. In that fleeting exchange, Sarah sensed something more, a kind of intelligence, even a plea for help. It was enough to send a shiver down her spine. "It's okay, girl," Sarah murmured soothingly. "We're here to help." Mike fired the tranquilizer dart, and the bear flinched before collapsing to the ground, her body succumbing to the sedative. Sarah approached cautiously, medical kit in hand, while Mike moved to investigate the hollow log. "Sarah, you need to see this," Mike called out, his voice thick with emotion. Inside the log, Sarah found two tiny creatures, a golden retriever puppy, no more than 8 weeks old, and a tiny kitten, barely able to open its eyes. The puppy wagged its tail weakly while the kitten nestled protectively against it. Sarah's heart caught in her chest. "They're alive," she whispered, stunned, "and they have collars." Mike nodded grimly. "Probably from that car accident on Miller's Bend last week. The driver swerved to avoid a bear and crashed. The pets went missing, but we never knew what happened to them." Sarah looked at the unconscious bear, still lying protectively by the log. "She found them," she murmured, "and instead of seeing them as prey, she protected them." The realization hit hard. This wasn't just a bear's instinct to survive. It was an act of compassion, one that defied all the rules of the wild. As they carefully transported the bear and her unlikely charges to safety, Sarah felt a surge of warmth in her chest. The forest had given her many stories, but none like this. This one was different. This was a tale of love, protection, and an unbreakable bond between species. The drive to the Montana Wildlife Rehabilitation Center was quiet, save for the sound of the truck engine and the occasional soft whimper of the puppy in Sarah's lap. Mike drove with the practiced ease of someone who knew the roads well, but his thoughts were clearly elsewhere. He glanced occasionally at the rearview mirror where the tranquilized bear lay, her unexpected charges resting in a small box lined with a blanket. "They're tougher than they look," Sarah murmured softly, stroking the puppy's head. "She gave everything to keep them alive." Mike nodded, his voice filled with wonder. "You don't see something like this every day. Makes you question what's really going on inside their heads." "It does," Sarah agreed, her eyes never leaving the bear. "We spend so much time trying to understand animals, but this feels different, something deeper." When they arrived at the center, the staff was already prepared, having been alerted by Sarah's earlier call. Dr. Rachel Anderson, the center's director, stood at the entrance, clipboard in hand, her professional demeanor faltering slightly as she saw the bear and her unusual companions. "I've heard some unbelievable things in my time," Rachel said, her voice a mix of skepticism and awe. "But this is beyond anything." Sarah nodded softly, lifting the puppy from her lap. The bear was guarding them as though they were her own. Despite her injuries, her focus was entirely on protecting them. Rachel studied the unconscious bear with astonishment. "We'll stabilize her, and the little ones seem all right, just a little dehydrated." Sarah's concern was evident. "We need to keep them together. They're bonded. Separation could cause stress." Rachel agreed immediately. "We'll keep them close." In the following hours, the team worked quickly to care for the bear and her charges. Hope, as the bear was now named, was examined and treated for her injuries, which included fractured ribs and a deep wound along her side. Despite the pain, her vital signs were strong, proof of her remarkable resilience. Meanwhile, Max the puppy and Faith the kitten were tended to, fed, and comforted. Max's collar confirmed he had been part of the family involved in the crash near Miller's Bend. Faith, though without a collar, was later identified as belonging to the same household. Sarah marveled at the remnants of berries and small prey near the log. "She'd been feeding them," she said, her voice filled with awe. "It's like she knew they couldn't survive on their own." Mike shook his head in disbelief. "A bear doing that? I've never seen anything like it. If you told me this story in a bar, I'd call you a liar." Sarah smiled faintly. "If I weren't living it, I might think the same." Later that day, the staff settled into a routine. Hope was placed in a private enclosure, Max and Faith in an adjacent one, separated by a reinforced glass barrier. The connection between them was palpable. Hope's ears twitched whenever Max or Faith moved, a silent acknowledgement of their bond. As Sarah stood by Hope's enclosure, she marveled at the bear's instinct to protect. In all her years of wildlife study, she had never encountered anything quite like this. "You're something special, aren't you?" Sarah whispered, her voice full of admiration. A soft voice interrupted her thoughts. It was Rachel, approaching with a tablet in hand. "The family from the car accident. They're asking about Max and Faith. Karen and Tom Davidson, they saw the news." Sarah's heart tightened. "What did you tell them?" Rachel smiled faintly. "I told them the truth, that their pets are alive thanks to an extraordinary bear." As the stars began to twinkle in the Montana sky, Sarah sat outside the center, a mug of coffee warming her hands. Mike joined her, settling into the chair beside her. "You ever think about what it all means?" Sarah asked, her voice soft as she gazed at the night sky. Mike chuckled softly. "Every day, Sarah, every single day." They sat in silence, the peaceful hum of the center around them. In the distance, the sounds of Max's tail wagging and Faith's gentle mewling filled the air, a quiet reminder that, against all odds, compassion and connection had bridged the divide between species. Later that evening, Sarah returned to Hope's enclosure. The bear was awake now, her dark eyes locked on Max and Faith through the glass. Though they were separated, the bond between them was unmistakable, a connection that needed no words. "Hey, girl," Sarah whispered softly, her voice calm and understanding. Hope's ears twitched, but she remained still, a silent guardian watching over her unlikely family. "I'm not sure what drove you to do it," Sarah said, her voice breaking the silence, "but I'm so grateful that you did. Those two are here today because of you." Hope's eyes shifted ever so slightly, catching Sarah's gaze for a brief moment. In that instant, Sarah felt an undeniable connection, something deeper than words could convey. Behind her, the gentle sound of paws signaled Max's approach. The puppy pressed his nose to the glass, tail wagging, looking up at Hope. Faith followed a beat later, brushing against Max's side as she too peeked at the bear. Hope responded with a low, almost imperceptible rumble, an unmistakable sound Sarah recognized, one that mother bears make to calm their cubs. But it wasn't just instinct at play, it was something more. Love, pure, deep, unshakable. The next morning, the center buzzed with unexpected news. Karen and Tom Davidson had been released from the hospital and were on their way to see their pets. "Do you think they'll believe it?" Mike asked, joining Sarah by the entrance. "They'll have to," Sarah replied with a faint smile. "The proof is right in front of them." When the Davidsons arrived, their faces a mix of exhaustion and relief, Karen, a small woman with warm eyes, tightly held her husband's hand as they stepped inside. "Are they—" Karen's voice quivered as she spoke. "They're safe," Sarah reassured her gently. "Come on. I'll show you." The reunion was as emotional as Sarah had imagined. Max bolted toward Karen the instant he saw her, tail wagging vigorously. Faith, always the quieter one, jumped into Tom's arms, curling up against his chest. But it was when Karen looked past the glass barrier and saw Hope that the gravity of the situation truly hit her. "She protected them," Karen whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. Sarah nodded, her eyes glistening. "She kept them safe when no one else could." Karen placed her hand on the glass, her gaze never leaving Hope. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Thank you for bringing them back to me." Hope watched silently, her gaze steady and serene. For a moment it was as if the bear understood, dipping her head slightly in what could only be seen as acknowledgement. As evening fell, Sarah sat outside the center once more, watching the sky change into hues of orange and purple. The Davidsons had left, promising to return soon, their hearts overflowing with gratitude. Mike sighed contentedly. "Well, Sarah," he said, tipping his hat back, "I think we've just witnessed a miracle." Sarah gave a faint smile, her eyes on the expansive Montana sky. "I think you're right." The next day, As the first light of morning filtered through the trees, the tale of hope began to spread far and wide. What began as a local story quickly caught the attention of state and national news outlets. The extraordinary bond between a bear and two helpless pets resonated with people everywhere. Sarah's phone was ringing nonstop, filled with calls from journalists, wildlife experts, and the curious public, all eager to hear more. Despite the increasing attention, Sarah's focus remained solely on Hope, Max, and Faith, who had settled into a peaceful routine. They interacted quietly through the glass, and Hope's behavior continued to amaze even the most experienced wildlife professionals. Rachel joined Sarah by the observation window, clipboard in hand, her attention fixed on Hope. "Do you see that?" she asked, gesturing to the bear, who was lying near the barrier, her body relaxed but eyes sharp as she watched Max and Faith play on the other side. "She's mimicking cub behavior." Sarah observed Hope's subtle changes in posture, noting how she seemed to respond to the animal's movements. "She's bonding with them in a way that goes beyond instinct," Sarah said, thoughtful. "It's almost like they're adapting to her, or maybe it's the other way around." Rachel nodded. "Either way, this isn't something you'll find in any textbook." By midday, the center was already receiving visitors, drawn by the remarkable story. A local third-grade class, initially scheduled for a general wildlife lesson, had specifically requested to hear about Hope. Sarah found herself standing in front of a room full of wide-eyed children, holding up a photo from the day of the rescue. The image showed Hope standing guard over the hollow log, her gaze fierce yet protective. "This is Hope," Sarah began, her voice calm but warm. "She's a black bear, one of the strongest creatures in our forests. But when she found Max and Faith, two vulnerable animals, she didn't hurt them. She protected them, even though she was injured herself." A young girl in the front row raised her hand, her pigtails bouncing as she asked, "Why did she do that?" Sarah paused, reflecting on the question. "We don't know for sure," she replied honestly, "but sometimes animals surprise us. They show us that kindness isn't just a human thing, it's something that can happen anywhere, even in the wild." The class listened intently as Sarah recounted Hope's injuries and the incredible actions that followed. By the end of the session, the children were filled with questions, eager to discuss how compassion could exist in the animal kingdom. Meanwhile, Karen and Tom Davidson became more involved with the center. Karen, still recovering from her own injuries, visited regularly, growing closer to Max and Faith with each passing day. Tom, a software engineer, began leveraging his professional connections to gather support for a new wildlife sanctuary initiative. "It's not just about Hope," he said during one visit. "It's about what she represents, the idea that compassion can break barriers we didn't think were possible. We want to build something that honors that." As the days passed, the sanctuary project began to gain momentum. Local businesses offered materials, volunteers signed up, and architects drew up plans for a space where Hope could heal fully, while maintaining the unique bond she had formed with Max and Faith. The sanctuary would also serve as an educational center, promoting wildlife conservation and teaching visitors about the power of empathy across species. One evening, as Sarah walked through the quiet hallways of the center, she paused in front of Hope's enclosure. The bear lay awake, her dark eyes reflecting the soft glow of moonlight, always watching over Max and Faith, who were resting in their adjacent space. Sarah leaned against the observation window and whispered, "You've changed so many lives, haven't you?" Hope didn't stir, but a tranquil presence filled the room. Sarah's heart swelled with pride and humility. Hope had taught her something unexpected, how, in a world often divided, the capacity for connection and care was universal. As spring gave way to summer, the sanctuary evolved from an idea into reality. Tom and Karen Davidson worked tirelessly to bring their vision to life, using their story to garner donations and secure volunteers. The sanctuary was constructed on the Davidsons' expansive 50-acre property, featuring a custom enclosure for Hope that mirrored her natural habitat. It included a stream, a den, and abundant plant life, with safe observation points for Max and Faith to interact with her. The transfer of Hope to her new home took place on a warm June morning, carefully coordinated by veterinarians, wildlife experts, and Sarah. Hope's anxiety was evident as the process began. She growled softly when separated from Max and Faith, pacing restlessly in her temporary carrier. "She doesn't want to leave them," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. Rachel, ever the practical one, suggested, "Let's bring Max over. Maybe he can help calm her." Max, now a healthy and energetic puppy, wagged his tail as he approached Hope's carrier. He barked gently, his golden eyes locked on the bear. Faith, ever dignified, stayed close to Max, her tiny form brushing against his side for reassurance. Immediately, Hope's growling ceased, and she made a soft, chuffing sound, the same comforting noise she had once made in the wild. Sarah's throat tightened as she watched Hope climb into the transport truck, her eyes fixed on Max and Faith. The moment was deeply moving, confirming that their bond was stronger than ever. Hope's first steps into her new enclosure were tentative but filled with curiosity. The spacious environment allowed her to roam freely, but she always returned to the interaction zone, where Max and Faith eagerly awaited behind the reinforced glass. Max wagged his tail excitedly, while Faith, ever graceful, perched on a ledge, her eyes wide with curiosity. As the weeks passed, a delicate balance emerged. Hope exhibited natural behaviors, swimming in the stream, foraging for food, but always returned to the interaction zone in the evenings where Max and Faith greeted her with unbridled joy. Then, one summer evening, Sarah noticed something unusual. Hope was gathering extra bedding, and her appetite had shifted. She seemed particularly protective of her den. Concerned, Sarah asked Rachel for a checkup. The ultrasound results were shocking. Hope was pregnant. The news was stunning. Hope, who had already demonstrated profound compassion by protecting Max and Faith, was now going to become a mother herself. The implications were immense. Not only would Hope raise her cubs, but the unique bond between the bear and the domestic animals added a layer of complexity no one had anticipated. When Hope gave birth, the sanctuary staff held their breath, hoping everything would go smoothly. To their relief, Hope was a natural mother, fiercely protective of her tiny cubs. But what happened next was even more extraordinary. During one of their supervised interactions, Hope led her cubs to the interaction zone, gently nudging them toward the glass barrier. Max sat patiently on the other side, tail wagging slowly. Faith, poised as ever, watched from a ledge, her eyes wide with curiosity. "She's introducing them," Sarah whispered, filled with awe. In the following months, Hope's cubs grew strong under her watchful care. They learned to forage, climb, and swim, but displayed an unusual gentleness when interacting with Max and Faith, as if they understood the special connection that had formed. As the seasons shifted, so did the sanctuary. Visitors came from across the country to learn about the remarkable bond between Hope, Max, and Faith. The story sparked discussions about compassion, coexistence, and the surprising depths of animal behavior. Researchers published studies, and school groups visited to learn not only about wildlife conservation but about empathy in the animal kingdom. Karen and Tom Davidson established the Hope Wildlife Sanctuary Foundation, raising funds to expand the sanctuary and research the bond between species. The sanctuary, named in honor of Hope, became a symbol of compassion and resilience, inspiring generations to come. One crisp autumn evening, Sarah stood by the observation window, watching as Hope and her cubs played in the distance. Max lay nearby, his golden coat glowing in the fading light, while Faith napped peacefully by the glass. Mike, joining her with a cup of coffee, remarked, "I always thought we were the ones teaching the animals. Turns out they've been teaching us all along." Sarah smiled, her gaze fixed on the peaceful scene. Hope didn't just save Max and Faith. She's shown us what's possible when we stop seeing differences and start seeing connections. As the stars began to twinkle above the Montana sky, Sarah felt a deep sense of peace. The sanctuary, much like its namesake, was more than just a place. It was a living testament to what could happen when love and compassion bridged the divides of nature. And as Hope settled into her den, her cubs curled beside her, Sarah knew that this story was far from over. It was a legacy of compassion, resilience, and the unbreakable bonds that can form in the most unexpected of circumstances.